Hello, all. This is Dr. Dave Maslach talking to you about reciprocity.com. The E is written with a 3. And in this particular video, I want to talk to you about creating and maintaining healthy boundaries in academia. So if you don't know me, I'm an associate professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, and I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There were so many people that helped me out that I wanted to pay the favor forward and help you out. So I created this sharing economy editing platform, and that's what reciprocity is. And then I'm doing these YouTube videos to help you sort of think through some of the things that we deal with as academics, as researchers, as students, whoever it is. And we deal with all these things on a daily basis. So have you ever kind of had the experience where you feel like you can never get enough done, where even though that you think you've accomplished absolutely everything, that there's still more work that you should be doing? This experience is really, really common for most academics, most PhDs that are out there. And it is a symptom of not creating healthy boundaries in your own personal life and in academic life. And the one thing that I did realize a long, long time ago, it is extremely hard to create boundaries in the academic world. There's lots of, not just in your own personal life that there's difficulties with creating boundaries, but I think it's exceptionally difficult with creating boundaries in academia, simply because we don't necessarily have moments that are sort of normal in the sense that your job starts and your personal life begins over here. So most people will work 9 to 5, or they'll go to an office and they'll sit in an office, and they will go home at 5 o'clock or 8 o'clock or whatever the time that they go home. And they know that that's the end of the day, or they know when the beginning of the day happens, and they can create these very healthy boundaries that are really clear for most people to see those particular boundaries, not only in the workplace, but at home as well. And so you don't necessarily have this bleed between your personal life and your home life. And there is a norm within academia to encourage you to work on weekends, to work at night, doing all of those kind of things. And there's lots of moments, or sort of lots of situations where boundaries become an issue in your personal life. And you get very stressed out, you get very anxious, you have all of these negative emotions, that feeling like you can never get anything done. Um, there's all sorts of things that are going on in the background that are a symptom, or as consequence of the fact that you are not setting healthy personal boundaries in the stuff that you're actually doing. And that often happens when you don't set your own personal boundaries and you don't make it clear to yourself that you can have these boundaries and to other people. But also often you run into issues with boundaries in your own personal life, in academia, when you run into people that might intrude on sort of norms that are set, or you think that are set, that are you think are clear, but they're not necessarily clear to them, or they're just maybe their experience, for example, or that they themselves have different boundaries, and it's not necessarily clear to everybody in the room about what these personal boundaries are. And so here are some examples of good personal boundaries that I think are very healthy, that you should set and think about in your own personal life in academia. So setting office hours, for example, of when students can go to your office. Not having the complete availability all the time of when people can actually go into your office and interrupt your work stream. Setting office hours that are clustered around when you normally teach. So an hour before, an hour after is very healthy in terms of clearing up or making sure that you're not dedicating your entire day to sort of teaching. And that's a really healthy thing to do, is to not make sure, or to bound when students actually can interrupt what you're actually doing. And the same goes with emails, simply just not responding, or not feeling that you have to respond on a regular basis to students, or to other people, or setting a time when you actually respond. That is completely healthy, and that's completely normal, and that's going to help you dedicate time for when you need to actually do work. Another boundary that I think is incredibly important is having a boundary of what you think is appropriate in terms of the of attire in the classroom or when you're actually doing work, right? So sometimes that students will wear things that you think are not necessarily all that appropriate. Well, you have to create personal boundaries in terms of what what you think is responsible in the classroom, right? So if something is a little too dicey, well, then you should maybe do something about that, or maybe get somebody to respond to that student. That have somebody actually have a conversation with them in terms of maybe this is not necessarily appropriate to wear these kind of things or do these kind of actions. And sometimes you have to say that kind of stuff out loud to some people, or find somebody else where it is appropriate to have that conversation, right? So maybe if it's somebody of the opposite sex, sometimes you might find somebody that would be a little bit more comfortable, maybe somebody of the same sex, to have a conversation about that with that particular person. And I know that's a little iffy, but you should be pretty clear with that, right? In terms of personal boundaries, just to make sure that everybody is upfront. Now, another thing is dealing with boundaries with authorship and co-working relationships. So, being clear in terms of when your duties are, when they start and when they end, what's expected of you. That's a really tricky thing, particularly with, maybe it's other academics or PhDs, and being really clear on that up front. And I think, and I'm learning, just like everybody else is learning, just being more clear up front. It's an awkward conversation. It's really weird. But at the same time, it also sort of sets the tone of thinking about when it is appropriate to do these kind of things and when it's not appropriate to do these kind of things. So being clear about those particular relationships, being clear in terms of your boundaries of interpersonal communication, right? So not going into an office where you feel like you don't have a say, where you feel attacked in any sort of way, having all these negative emotions. That's stuff that you should be raising boundaries, and you should be saying that's not appropriate behavior. And you have to be clear about those kind of things in terms of when you're having those moments where it doesn't feel appropriate. It's okay to say that's inappropriate behavior. If you're at a presentation and somebody's being extremely aggressive, it's okay to stand up and say that's an inappropriate behavior. It's hard to do that, and it's awkward to do it, but you have to sort of do that sometimes. Setting boundaries in terms of how you think other people should be treated and how you yourself should be treated. I think that's important. So if you see somebody that's being bullied, for example, just like in elementary school, sometimes you have to take a stand and say something about that, or be clear on whether that's appropriate and whether that's not appropriate, right? So sometimes you have to set boundaries in when you're going to respond to emails or do work. Sometimes you just simply don't have to, do those particular things if you're working on something else. And setting boundaries, and I think it's important too, not in terms of the working world, but thinking about your own personal life and setting boundaries with others in your personal life of like, okay, this is a time where I'm actually going to be doing work, or this is a time where, I'm going to dedicate doing this particular project. Can you just not disturb me during that time? And being clear about that kind of stuff is going to be very helpful. So how do you actually practice doing healthy boundaries? I know, and we all struggle with this. I'm going to be painfully clear at this moment that I struggle with this, and it's probably why I'm doing this video right now, is just to sort of tell you that this is an issue that it's an ongoing thing that we all have to deal with, and it's all difficult to do. You have to practice saying no and ignoring demands that are put on you. So if you're a person that is a people pleaser, I'm very empathetic. I'm very sort of a nice person. You could see that somebody that's actually created this project, the Reciprocity Project, right? I'm an overtly helpful person. So I have to practice for my own sanity to say no a lot more and be clear as much as I can. And as well, sometimes I have to practice saying no to demands or ignoring demands that are put on me. and practice doing those things. And it's not something that comes easy to me. I'm assuming it's probably not something that comes easy to you if you're watching this video, but it's something that I personally struggle with, and I have to be more clear going forward and developing in myself as an academic, because it is really important. One tool that I do with people that I interact with that are exceptionally good with this kind of stuff, one tool that a lot of academics do is they just simply ignore emails that are sent to them and they just don't respond to them. And that is a polite way to say that, yeah, I'm not really all that interested in that particular thing. So if that ever happens to you, it's them setting up healthy boundaries and saying, I'm not particularly interested in this. And you could try to communicate a couple of times, but if they just don't respond, it usually is a signal that, yeah, they're just not interested in their being polite in terms of, communicating to you that that's not something that they're willing to do. Now, another thing is sometimes you have to be clear with your boundaries and you have to just write them down, right? So it's not enough often to have a conversation, in that I'd recommend it, but sometimes just being really nice and polite with the boundaries that you set in terms of written communication is really a nice way to do things, because it's set in stone. That's one thing that you have to be clear about. When you write something, it is set in stone. People have those email communications for a long time. So just be careful with it, but at the same time, be polite and just know these are my boundaries, and actually communicate what those boundaries are. The one thing, so this is the third thing I was going to point out, is when you create boundaries, they're going to be awkward. There's no doubt about it that you are going to experience a lot of emotional distress. And the reason is, when you create boundaries, other people are going to get angry. That they're gonna try to do things like, make you feel sorry for them or empathetic, or all those kind of emotions. You're going to get an emotional response, and that is a natural thing, right? Like, on both sides is a natural thing to experience. And just know, if they're going through those experiences and you're going through those feelings, it's okay to just simply try to ignore them, right? That you are creating your own personal boundaries of what you think is appropriate and what you can actually possibly do in your life. And whatever it is, that's where you just kind of have to let the chips fall. And that's an important thing to realize, that, if somebody has an emotional response, you don't have to rush in and try to help out with that emotional response. So if you're interested in this sort of boundary things, there's a couple of books that I think are interesting. One of them it's a book by, I think it's Henry Cloud. I put a link into it. It's Boundaries. The problem is with that book is it's a good book in terms of, what they're trying to communicate, but it's pretty religious. And, as somebody that, religion is important, I think it's a little bit overdone in that book. Another book that was really good is it's about sociopaths, and it is called The Sociopaths Next Door. It's pretty interesting in terms of understanding how there is a lot of people in this world that just simply don't have a conscience in terms of when they're interacting with other people. And when you deal with those particular people and you just don't know who they are, they're going to do things that violate your own personal boundaries and stuff like that. So just look at those books. They're just really good reads in terms of, understanding this kind of stuff and setting up your own personal boundaries and being clear about who you are as an individual. Again, this is me coming to terms as a 40-year-old and dealing with these kind of things of, I have to set my own boundaries. I have to set who I am. I have to deal with the things of who I am. And I want to define who I am when I become 50 and 60 years old, so that other people know who I am, and I'm happy and pleased with who I am going forward. And that's all I wanted to say with this video. Give me a thumbs up. Do subscribe to the YouTube channel. I very much appreciate it. Take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.